That's a weapon.
Yeah. All right, firing.
Light them all up.
Come on, fire.
Keep shooting.
Well, first, thank you for inviting me to speak with such an eminent group of people and a panel. First, can I take the opportunity to thank Raphael? I haven't had the opportunity to thank you personally for the decision that your government took, which was a principled one to grant Julian asylum inside the embassy. And in fact, a decision which was vindicated by the very case that he's now facing right now and the extradition proceedings which we've just been fighting. I think it's important to recognise that what Ecuador did was a remarkably strong and principled decision in the face of immense political pressure from global powers, a decision which was affirmed by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. It was the British government who was acting unlawfully and refusing to recognise the grant of asylum that was given by Ecuador. And indeed the pressure that Ecuador came under. So I just wanted to, again, offer my thanks, personal thanks, and thanks on behalf of Julian for what the government of Ecuador did under your leadership. We've just finished 4 weeks of hearings in the Old Bailey, evidential hearings in the Old Bailey in our fight to resist extradition to protect Julian from being sent to the United States. We've had around 40 witnesses and evidence that I think is remarkable. For those of you that have been following the case, it won't be a surprise, but for many, I think what we did in the past 4 weeks was to attempt to set the historical record straight on what Wikileaks has done, what Julian Assange has done with the publications of Wikileaks, and what this US indictment means. So what we've heard expert evidence on is something that I have been sounding like a broken record about for the past decade, which is about the impact that this criminal investigation and indictment of Julian Assange will have on free speech, not just in the United States, but globally. We heard from the Freedom of the Press Foundation in the United States about how this indictment, which criminalizes not just the publication of information, classified information, but the receipt and possession of classified information, and how this will put an end to all national security journalism and criminalize public interest journalistic practices. We heard evidence from political experts in the United States about the political interference in this case and the way in which this is a political prosecution and indeed persecution of Julian Assange by the Trump administration. We heard how the Obama administration had made an active decision not to indict Assange on the basis of the concern about how this case would be used against the rest of the media, the so-called New York Times problem. And yet now we have an administration that has taken a very different position and is using this case as a precedent-setting case which will be used to go after the rest of the media under an administration that calls the media the enemy of the people. We also heard evidence about the political interference by the Trump administration. I myself gave evidence in the case about a pardon deal which was offered by representatives purporting to represent President Trump. And the deal that was offered was that if Julian was willing to reveal the source of the DNC, the 2016 election publications, then he would be given a pardon. And that was important politically at that time because Trump was then the subject of the Mueller inquiry. And if Julian had revealed his source to show that it was not the Russian state, and indeed they hoped was an insider within the Democratic National, the DNC, then he would be let off. And this shows how the Trump administration was willing to treat this case as a political bargaining chip to benefit him politically. We also heard evidence of what, for me as a human rights lawyer, is so important about the way in which the WikiLeaks material has been used for human rights accountability efforts worldwide. We heard evidence from Clive Stafford Smith of Reprieve about the way in which WikiLeaks material was used in their efforts on behalf of Guantanamo detainees. It was used by their efforts in seeking to prosecute CIA officials in Pakistan for unlawful extrajudicial killings through drone strikes in Pakistan. We heard evidence about how the diplomatic cables, the WikiLeaks cables, were used, and indeed I cited them myself in the International Court of Justice in having British occupation of the Chagos Islands for US military purposes to be declared unlawful, and how important WikiLeaks cables were in that context. So I think it's really important to recognise the importance of WikiLeaks material in trying to hold the powerful to account for their abuses around the world. And striking to me that we have the person who is responsible for having revealed this information and enabling us to be able to undertake these advocacy and accountability efforts is in prison while those responsible for the abuses continue to enjoy impunity. So we also heard important evidence, and I think this is amongst the most important, around WikiLeaks publication processes. We have heard over and over again for a decade that WikiLeaks somehow and Julian has blood on his hands for having released this information. What we heard in the court in the past month is that the US government has no evidence of one individual being harmed as a result of WikiLeaks publications, which puts the lie to the accusations and the propaganda that has been put out about the supposed danger caused by WikiLeaks publications. We also heard extensive evidence about the redaction processes that WikiLeaks undertook with their media partners in order to protect against the harm that the United States claims took place, and the security procedures that were put in place. So this notion that the US government is putting about that Julian was reckless, that people were harmed, is simply false. The question then is, what is this going to mean in terms of the judgment? So we now have written submissions. There'll be no closing arguments, and the judgment will be handed down in February, the 4th of February, 2021. It remains to be seen whether the evidence we put will make a difference, and this judge will exercise her discretion to stop extradition. But we remain hopeful that even if we don't win at this level, that there will be appeals. It may end up in the UK Supreme Court. It may end up in the European Court of Human Rights. But we are committed to fighting this all of the way because of the implications that this has for Julian. I just wanted to say a couple of words too about the impact on him. For those of you who are watching remotely, you will have seen the difficulties that we had communicating with him because he's being held in a glass box at the back of the court. It's impossible. I have to get up and move out of my seat to be able to speak to him. And when he wants to tell me something about what's happening in the evidence, he can only whisper it to me through the glass defense box. And it's so loud that the prosecutor sitting next to us can hear exactly what he's saying to us. So we can't take confidential instructions from him during the course of the trial. It's still incredibly upsetting to me that I have to go and visit a Nobel Peace Prize nominated publisher and journalist in a high security prison in Britain, which is supposed to be the world's leading democracy. It is devastating to have to go into the underbelly of the Old Bailey to visit a publisher who does not deserve to be in prison. And he's going to be in prison for another Christmas while we wait for this judgment, and potentially longer while we appeal this case. I can't underestimate the personal impact that this has had on him. We heard evidence of the psychiatric impact, that he is suicidal, and that there is a very high risk that if he is extradited to the United States, he will in fact commit suicide. This is that serious and that stark. We have a Nobel Peace Prize nominated publisher in a high security prison facing 175 years in prison for publications which have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.